Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Esio Trot. I can't wait to see what happens next. If you haven't already listened to part 1, you can go back and watch that now. Let's see what Mr Hoppy's great idea is. Mrs Silver, he said, I do actually happen to know how to make tortoises grow faster, if that's what you really want. You do? She cried. Oh, please tell me, am I feeding him the wrong things? I worked in North Africa once, Mr Hoppy said. That's where all these tortoises in England come from. And a Bedouin tribesman told me the secret. Tell me, said Mrs Silver. I beg you tell me, Mr Hoppy. I'll be a slave for life. When he heard the words, your slave for life, a little shiver of excitement swept through Mr Hoppy. Wait there, he said. I'll have to go in and write something down for you. In a couple of minutes, Mr Hoppy was back on the balcony with a sheet of paper in hand. I'm going to lower it to you on a bit of string, he said, or it might blow away. Here it comes. Mrs Silver caught the paper and held it up in front of her. This is what she read. Esio Trot, Esio Trot, Teg Regib, Regib. Emok no Esio Trot. Werg poo, fup pup, toos poo, gnurps poo, wol poo, loose poo. Egrog, ezug, futs plug, tup no taff, Esio Trot, tup no taff. Teg no, elbog doof. What does this mean? She asked. Is it another language? It's tortoise language, Mr Hoppy said. Tortoises are very backwards creatures. Therefore, they can only understand words that are written backwards. That's obvious, isn't it? I suppose so, Mrs Silver said, bewildered. Esio Trot is simply tortoise spelled backwards, Mr Hoppy said. Look at it. So it is, Mrs Silver said. The other words are spelled backwards too, Mr Hoppy said. If you turn them round into human language, they simply are. Tortoise, tortoise, get bigger, bigger. Come on, tortoise. Grow up, puff up, shoot up. Spring up, blow up, swell up. Gorge, guzzle, stuff, gulp. Put on fat, tortoise, put on fat. Get on, gobble food. Mrs Silver examined the magic words on the paper more closely. I guess you're right, she said. How clever, but there's an awful lot of poos in there. Are they something special? Poo is a very strong word in any language, Mr Hoppy said, especially with tortoises. Now what you have to do, Mrs Silver, is hold Alfie up to your face and whisper these words to him 3 times a day, morning, noon and night. Let me hear you practice them. Very slowly and stumbling a little over the strange words, Mrs Silver read the whole message out loud in tortoise language. Not bad, Mr Hoppy said, but try to get a little more expression into it when you say it to Alfie. If you do it properly, I'll bet you anything that in a few months' time he'll be twice as big as he is now. I'll try it, Mrs Silver said. I'll try anything. Of course I will, but I can't believe it'll work. You wait and see, Mr Hoppy said, smiling at her. Back in his flat, Mr Hoppy was simply quivering all over with excitement. Your slave for life, he kept repeating to himself. What bliss! But there was a lot of work to be done before that happened. The only furniture in Mr Hoppy's small living room was a table and 2 chairs. These he moved into his bedroom. Then he went out and bought a sheet of thick canvas and spread it over the entire living room floor to protect his carpet. Next, he got out the telephone book and wrote down the address of every pet shop in the city. There were 14 of them altogether. It took him 2 days to visit each pet shop and choose his tortoises. He wanted a great many, at least 100, perhaps even more, and he had to choose them very carefully. To you and me, there is not much difference between one tortoise and another. They differ only in their size and in their colour of their shells. Alfie had a darkish shell, so Mr Hoppy chose only the darker shelled tortoises for his great collection. Size, of course, was everything. Mr Hoppy chose all sorts of different sizes, some weighing only a slightly more than Alfie's 13 ounces, others a great deal more. But he didn't want any that weighed less. Feed them cabbage leaves, the pet shop owner told him. That's all they need, and a bowl of water. When he had finished, Mr Hoppy, in his enthusiasm, had bought no less than 140 tortoises, and he carried them home in baskets, 10 or 15 at a time. He had to make a lot of trips, and he was quite exhausted at the end of it all, but it was worth it. Boy, it was worth it! And what an amazing sight his living room was when they were all in there together. The floor was swarming with tortoises of different sizes, some walking slowly about and exploring, some munching cabbage leaves, others drinking water from a big shallow dish. They made just the faintest rustling sound as they moved over the canvas sheet, but that was all. Mr Hoppy had to pick his way carefully on his toes between the moving sea of brown shells whenever he walked across the room. But enough of that, he must get on with the job. Before he retired, Mr Hoppy had been a mechanic in a bus garage, and now he went back to his old place of work and asked his mates if he might use his old bench for an hour or two. What he had to do now was make something that could reach down from his balcony to Mrs Silver's balcony and pick up the tortoise. This was not difficult for a mechanic like Mr Hoppy. First, he made 2 metal claws or fingers, and these he attached to the end of a long metal tube. He ran 2 stiff wires down inside the tube and connected them to his metal claws in such a way that when you pulled the wires, the claws closed, and when you pushed them, the claws opened. The wires were joined to a handle at the other end of the tube. It was all very simple. Mr Hoppy was ready to begin. Thank you for listening to part 2 of Esio Trot. I can't wait to see you again for part 3. Bye.